Hi, it's Dennis Daly. I've done a lot of fun interviews over the years, and now and then I try to figure out what my favorites were, but there is one in the back of my mind that always has to be near the top of the list: the interviews with Steve Allen, the great Renaissance man. He was the host of The Tonight Show when I was a child. He says he came to television just at the right time.
Well, I was moving out of radio into television, which actually turned out to be a very easy transition, considering the two kinds of work I would eventually do in television, that being hosting talk shows, although always as a comedian, and secondly doing primetime comedy sketch shows. The radio training was invaluable, and that applies not only to my own experience, but just to talk for a moment about the talk show field. There was the earlier generation of the talk show hosts, Johnny Carson, Jack Paar, myself, a few others, and we were all, again, radio trained. It's not that we went into radio to prepare for television. Television hadn't even been invented when most of us got into radio, but it just turned out to have that happy result. Whereas most of the talk show people now, the Letterman generation, have had no experience whatever in radio. They come out of comedy clubs, and I don't think that's nearly as good preparation. First of all, they are surprisingly inarticulate, depending on what one means by the term articulate. It's remarkable how rarely you hear an actual coherent English sentence these days on television in general, but particularly the ad-lib portions. So there was that difference. But there were some negatives, too, to the transition from radio to TV. In radio, as you know, as a practitioner of it, silence is the background canvas on which sounds are painted, so to speak. And they had big signs in radio studios, "Quiet, please," shh, words to that general effect. Whereas nobody's ever bothered much about that in television settings. And it was quite a shock for those of us who did comedy and radio, where we had the advantage of the early experience in totally quiet surroundings. The only sound you would hear outside of your own remarks was the happy laughter of audiences, and there was that generally respectful attitude as regards just extraneous noise. Well, that changed abruptly as soon as we moved into television and began working in theaters with studio audiences. There were all kinds of distractions, none of which existed in radio. At any moment, the comedian or star, whoever it was, would be speaking, competing with him for the attention of the studio audience. Might be 12 chorus girls over to the left of the stage about to prepare for a dance number, 3 men pushing big pieces of machinery around on stage, 2 or 3 cameras, 1 or 2 microphone dollies, those big rubber-wheeled carts that they lug microphones on, that are kept out of sight, of course, and announcers standing in the wings, laughing at or not. There's an awful lot going on, and finally, of course, we all adjusted to that, and now comedians can succeed despite those problems, but it did initially come as a shock.
You know, you mentioned something there about radio. I know I've had friends who've watched me interview, and they say, well, you always seem to have a question to ask. And I think it's because, having started in radio, even though, as you say, silence is a necessary, wonderful thing, there is this propensity, though, to have to put something in there. Now, if you're a comedian, I guess it has to be funny, but in the case of an interviewer, it's deadly if I, on this side of the mic, a second of nothing seems an eternity for some reason.
Yeah, that's an important factor. Again, I don't have to instruct you because you're a very good and experienced interviewer, but I've heard people say in response to my comment that almost anybody could host a Tonight-type talk show, television talk show, where you have 600 people present and you're supposed to entertain them as well as the viewers. They sometimes say, oh no, you can't be right about that. I'd be terrified at interviewing people. I don't understand their terror. People are interviewing each other all over the world at this moment, saying things like, you know, brother, can you spare a dime? Or, hi, Bob, how's your sister? All kinds of questions. We ask people questions all day long. We don't get up out of bed and ask for the script for Thursday.
We are in the offices of Steve Allen, the original host of The Tonight Show, composer, artist, arranger, producer, author of novels and short stories, movie star, television personality, philanthropist, and downright deep thinker. Well, there isn't that much Steve Allen has not done in his long and varied career. Before the break, we were talking about his early days in television, the start of the talk show, and I asked him, of all the people who have ever done TV talk, which he thinks has been the best.
Merv Griffin was possibly the best interviewer of the well-known talk show hosts on TV. And I think his secret, if you want to call it that, was very simple. He listened to you. He also worked in close physical proximity to you. He had more fun, I think, doing his show after he got rid of the traditional desk. And he worked with the same prepared list of questions that all television staffs provide all TV talk show hosts. They find out what the guest wants to plug, his new movie, his record album, his new marriage, whatever it might be he wants to talk about. And they break that information up into 5 or 6 questions, and then they give those type list of questions, as you know, to Jay Leno or David Letterman or Donald Duck or whoever they're working for. And but of all the people who've ever used those, I think Merv used them the least. And all he was doing was something that men have been doing or women have been doing for a million years. You just listen to the answers to your first few questions, and after that it's just like two guys having a conversation on a bus.
When you left radio and went into television, did you see the camera as something that was easy to talk to? I mean, starting in radio, of course, radio, by its very essence, even with an audience, I think would feel more automatically one-to-one. But was it difficult to get past the audience into the camera?
No, it wasn't for me. First of all, I had an easy period before I was full-time employed in TV. I had been on it as a guest or an occasional participant in a number of instances in the late 1940s. So when I finally did it full-time, it wasn't suddenly jumping into cold water for the first time. I already felt comfortable with it. And then, too, I never have worked very differently on TV. I'm just me anyway. I'm the only comedian in show business who does not have an act. I just find out how long I'm supposed to amuse or entertain, whatever. And I fill in my hour or my 90 minutes, and the people are nice enough to laugh, and they pay me, and I go home. So my style was just accidentally well-suited for the casual kind of television. There are other kinds of TV, as you know, that are not casual, that are prepared, written, and they're often excellent, too. But the easygoing approach was natural to me. I wasn't, however, the first to have to put it to use. There were 2 fellows before me. We actually overlap, but they got started earlier than I did, who never hosted a talk show, but nevertheless paved the way for the talk show style. I refer to Arthur Godfrey and Dave Garroway. Young people today don't know their names. In fact, many young people today don't know the names of Thomas Jefferson or Thomas Aquinas, for that matter. But nevertheless, they were very important in the 1950s. In fact, Godfrey was more important than anybody ever has been since on television. He was in your eyes and in your ears morning, noon, and night. At one time he had 3 shows in the top 10, and either 1 or 2 of those shows were seen on television and at the same time heard on radio. So, but anyway, what distinguished Arthur and what was similar to Garroway's work, although they were different, was the casual conversational approach. And neither knew how to act, neither was interested at all in acting. They were not performers. They would not have worked in nightclubs. That would have made no sense. But they were ideal for the casual, one viewer at a time at home kind of thing that television was.
I have a copy of Arthur Godfrey's last radio show on CBS, and I happened to be listening to it the other day, and I was thinking exactly as you said, there is such a temptation as you get older, I want to choose my words carefully here, to almost resent the fact that young kids haven't heard these people. Now, that it's a complete non sequitur, but listening to that show, you realize that the man was just so wonderfully calm and quiet about what he did, and to use a very trite phrase, could sell snow to the Eskimos. When you would go to an affiliates meeting at CBS, they would say, "We will discuss any change in the CBS radio network except for Arthur Godfrey and Lowell Thomas."
Sure. Well, I'm not sure about the full reasons for their loyalty to Lowell Thomas. He was delightful, and he was a voice of sanity and just general common sense in his capacity as a newsman and news editorialist. But the money came 98% of it from Arthur. Because his shows cost almost nothing to create, because there was nothing much to them. 90% of the show was Arthur, and then in some instances he would have a small orchestra, and occasionally have someone get up and sing or something, or interview a guest, although that was rare. But he was of enormous importance to them.
Steve Allen is the product of radio, having started there first, and I asked him when he was growing up, what stations or announcers or programs did he listen to late at night?
Well, if you're talking about radio, when I was a kid, I used to listen to the great music that was then commonly available, literally 7 days a week on the radio. One of the reasons that our country is in such cultural and general social trouble, which is agreed to by every single thoughtful person, whether of the political right or the left, all races, all religions, all colors. Every political and philosophical camp agrees that we're in a hell of a lot of trouble right now. And nothing that bad, nothing that serious could be occasioned by just one cause or just two or three causes. There are literally dozens of causative factors on the list accounting for our present sorry predicament. And one of them is the almost total collapse of musical taste. Now, no one who's, let's say, 22 years old wants to hear this. They think, oh, there's an old man talking about the fact that he prefers his music. No, you're missing the point if that is your reaction. And in fact, none of you may be guilty of so stupid a reaction, so forgive me for thinking you might be. To put the matter very concisely, Rhapsody in Blue is really better than Switchblade Baby, I'm Gonna Stab You Tonight. The music of the Golden Age, and it's rightly called a Golden Age, was created by the greatest composers and greatest lyricists of the century. And one happy gleam in the surrounding darkness is that today's young songwriters concede that. They don't think they're better than Ira Gershwin or Cole Porter or Irving Berlin or Johnny Mercer at writing lyrics. They say, oh, no, man, we're not that good. We're working at it, but those men were giants and we respect them. And the young composers today, not a one of them has ever claimed that he's 1/10 as good as Jerome Kern or George Gershwin or the other giants of that day. So we are talking not just about a difference in generational taste, but a true and serious collapse in quality. And this has a number of unfortunate effects, some of which relate to radio. So that's a very long roundabout way of answering your question as to what I listened to. I listened to then great music, and it had a wonderful effect on me in my capacity as composer. My primary creative gift is for the composition of music, and it's obvious that all composers write in the style to which they are early exposed. That's one of the reasons today's music is getting steadily worse, because the 17-year-olds and 22-year-olds are not listening much to Gershwin, or for that matter to Brahms or Beethoven. There are some of them who are, thank God, and they're very talented. But most kids are listening to musical garbage, and therefore they're producing musical garbage if they want to write songs.
You know, I'm biting the hand that feeds me by saying this, but 2 weekends ago I'm in Denver. And instead of trying to find an FM station in Denver, I picked up KNX out here in Los Angeles on AM. When you and I were younger, we were listening, and I think I can speak for you with this, not just to the radio stations in our hometown, but growing up in Indiana, I listened to WWL in New Orleans, so I had the Dixieland Jazz program, CCO in Minneapolis, WJR in Detroit. And now, because FM only reaches a rather small area, it's compounded by the fact you have this limited vision even in broadcasting. And if no one knew geography before, they're certainly not learning it now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you're right. As I mentioned earlier, we are in a state of collapse and decline. The news is not 100% bad. Even in, I guess, prison, it isn't 100% bad. You might have had good oatmeal this morning or some little, happy news. But it's largely bad. And it's easy to criticize. The more difficult thing is to prescribe improvements. And if you ever have about 4 weeks, I have a number of those too, but I won't tie you up with them now.
One interesting thing about Steve Allen is, even though we perceive him As a multi-talented man, but as a comedian primarily, the initial host of The Tonight Show, he is indeed a deep thinker. He has written volume after volume of works in which he has bared his soul. He's also been the kind of person who has paid tribute to others. The very first book to outline the career of Cesar Chavez, the champion of the farm workers in California, was a piece put together by Steve Allen. In the following minutes, we're going to be talking about a lot of things, but let's return to the topic of music for a moment. Earlier on, Steve Allen had mentioned that he thought his main gift was the ability to compose, and I asked him to take some time to talk to young people and to parents about the importance of learning music, the discipline of music, the love of music, and the importance of music in our lives.
Well, music is of such enormous importance, just to use the term in the broadest possible sense, that it doesn't require any defense on my part. Probably, I would think that 98% of the inhabitants of our planet are interested in some sort of music or other. We find it in primitive societies. We find it among, at the other extreme, the most highly educated and sophisticated and tasteful people. But there is good and bad in all fields, whether you're talking about religion, ping pong, making custard pie, whatever it is. There are good custard pies and stupid, bad, ill-flavored custard pies. So in music, you have the good and the bad. And there are many instances now where a parent, let's say, who's 40, is trying to influence the thinking and the musical taste of his 8 or 12-year-old son or daughter. And it's a struggle, because you can bring home good albums and good CDs and control the TV a little bit, control the radio a little bit when you're with the children, but you're not with them all the time. And therefore, your good advice may be swept away by the flood of garbage material to which they are usually daily exposed.
Would it scare you to have a child now, small child, starting out again in the world we live in?
Yes, I have something like that experience because I have 14 grandchildren. Most of them are scattered around the country, but there are 3 now. There's a new little girl who live just a few blocks from us, so I see them a few times every week. And I'm very sensitively aware of the difficulty of trying to keep children pure and innocent and informed. The 3 kids are all adorable. I guess we're all born adorable. Hitler must have been adorable when he was 1 year old, so that doesn't add up to much. But I have to constantly explain to the 2 boys, who are 10 and 8, that the purpose of their education, in addition to the obvious, which is, so they'll learn to count and multiply and speak grammatically and so forth, the purpose of their education is so that at the end of it they will be gentlemen. And at first, I think they just didn't understand what I meant by that, but I've been saying it to them for so many years now that they do indeed understand it. And I often hold up the standard of the gentleman to them when I hear them using vulgar language. They are not tough little, rebellious kids. They're good kids, and they go to a good school, and their father is comfortably fixed economically. They have many of life's blessings and forms of good luck. But the point is that even children in those fortunate circumstances are exposed, partly because of radio, television, films, and recordings, to what may ultimately be an overwhelming barrage of misinformation and vulgarity and obscenity and heartlessness and cruelty. So again, to return to your question, yes, this particular time and place is one of the most difficult in history, if the ideal is to produce children, to bring them, let's say, to the age of 15 or 16, and at the end of that process be able to point to them as bright and informed and civilized and decent to their fellow humans.
The other day in a shopping mall, a 7-year-old boy knocks me down. Coming through, just knocks me on the floor. I had broken my leg about a year ago, and I'm still a little afraid of falling. I say to him, "You're excused." And his mother turns to me and says, "Why are you talking to my son?" And I thought, boy, it's not just the child's fault.
Oh, of course. Had she witnessed his running into you?
Yeah, just didn't. It was my fault. I spoke to a stranger.
Yeah, and he didn't say, "Oh, I'm sorry, mister."
No.
Well,
I should have said, "I'm sorry. Your son's lack of tact shouldn't keep me from being in practice." But I didn't think to say that.
Yeah, we all think of good lines after the people went home. Well, of course, most of the time when children really louse up, it's the parent's fault in one regard or another, sins of commission or omission. And it would appear that on the basis of admittedly scanty evidence, that woman has done very little to teach her son manners. And you do have to really work hard at that. I don't recall clearly how my generation happened to learn manners, but
it's parochial school.
That was part of it, yeah. And even the public schools, too, were vastly more civilized then than they are now. There were teachers who were good, decent human beings and incorporated instructions in manners. Today, the kids don't seem to be getting much, and as a result, you have problems with table manners and simple social deportment. And that's an example. You bump into somebody, you're supposed to say, "Oh, I'm sorry, excuse me," or "ouch," or something that indicates you're reacting like a thoughtful human being and not just a rude machine.
One thing that I have always considered to be rather magical, Steve says his great gift from God is his ability to write music. I mentioned to him the fact that I always thought composing music was just one of those things that for those of us who can't, we look at that very much in awe.
That's true, and you're very perceptive in realizing how unexplainable the ability to create music is. I don't mean simply to play the piano or play the violin. That's nice, but it's not essentially mysterious. It's a mechanical skill. But the ability to write music, to create music, or for that matter, sculpture or painting or great drama, is incredibly mysterious, and not only to myself, not only to most folks, but to those who specialize in studying human motivations and the behavior of the brain. We really don't know why, out of any given 100 people, if you gave all of them piano lessons, let's say, with the same teacher, if that were possible, and they all practiced 1 hour a day for 10 years, at the end of that time, you'd probably have 2 really wonderfully gifted pianists, and you'd have maybe 62 who could, play piano at a party now and then, have a little fun and a couple of beers. And then you'd also have a remainder that, despite all that work and practice, were awful at the piano and never should have bothered about it in the first place. I think the primary factors involved in creativity are genetic. But that remark that I just made didn't clarify anything. It greatly deepened the mystery. Because what it means is, and I mean this in the most literal sense, some little smear of stuff that would look like a smear of tapioca in a glass dish. Let's really explain why Einstein could use his brain cells to do things, which is to say, to conceive thoughts, that no one else was ever able to before his time, and damn few since his time can even understand. And I think this applies in a perhaps simpler way to superiority of any sort. William Shakespeare is still the greatest playwright of all time, and perhaps the greatest poet as well, not because he was determined, not because he had a father that encouraged him, not because he had a good English teacher in school. I think it has to be genetic. He was just born superior. Take athletics, where the mystery is not nearly as deep. I don't believe Michael Jordan is the best of all, or whoever might be the best this week, simply because when the other kids went home, when they were all 14 years old, he stayed an extra 20 minutes on the ball court. I don't believe that's it at all. He was just superior by genetic nature. Now, he could have frittered away his gift, or maybe just lived in some place where there were no basketballs, and then we'd never have known about his gift. But superiority is quite mysterious, and again, to repeat the point, I believe it's primarily genetic.
When you were doing interviews, did you ever have a crazy question pop into your mind? I'm spoiling it here, and you don't know whether to interrupt the flow, because all of a sudden I'm tempted to ask you, who played Benny Goodman's mother in the movie? I have no idea why that. I'm of course thinking of your career in my mind, and I picture that wonderful woman who played opposite you in the movie.
Yeah, I think her name was Berta Gersten, Gersten, which encounters me for 12 points in the game of Trivial Pursuit.
You get called on Jeopardy.
Yes. My memory is spotty. I guess everyone's memory is. But I'm almost certain that was her name.
Did you enjoy that experience?
It was great fun doing that picture, yes. Chiefly, oddly enough, because I got to hang around with some of my boyhood idols. It was really a delight to spend social time and also play a little bit when we weren't on camera with Lionel Hampton and Gene Krupa and Teddy Wilson, Harry James, and Stan Getz, who came along at a later generation, but he worked on the film. I love jazz musicians. I work in a lot of jazz clubs to this day, and it's always fun to hang around with the guys and to play with them. I didn't really get to spend much time with Benny. For that matter, no one ever did. None of the people he worked with over the years. He was a sort of a reclusive, odd, cold fellow. But it was an honor, of course, to be chosen to play him. There must have been dozens of actors who would like to have done that.
It was interesting casting, considering your background.
Yes. Well, I had done serious acting before that, and I guess the people at Universal were aware of that fact. It wouldn't be like a gamble like hiring David Letterman to it. As a matter of fact, I think now of a situation going back about 3 years when I was talking to NBC about doing a film, and they wanted some young comic to work in it, which was a good idea. And the first one we approached was Jay Leno, and I got a lovely note back from him. He said, "Boy, what a neat idea." He said, "Unfortunately, I can't act," so that took care of that. Mm-hmm. But in any event, as I say, I had professional experience. A very odd thing about my career, considering that I am primarily a comedian, is that whenever I am hired to act, it's almost never in a comedy. The Benny Goodman movie had no comedy in it, and I once played a serious role as George Gershwin on a Canadian production, and have done a number of serious roles in TV and films and theaters over the years.
It may not be fair because it comes to you naturally, but a lot of people, such as Buddy Hackett, have said it would be more difficult for an actor to do comedy than for a comedian to do serious acting, since comedy is such work to begin with.
Yes, most people, even if we just limit it to most professional performers, are not very good at comedy. The percentage of people who are good has greatly improved in the last 10 or 15 years. A lot of the young comics, Jerry Seinfeld would be just one example of dozens you might name, are very relaxed and realistic in their comedy acting. And that's a sharp change, because the older generation, I won't use any names here, but the generation of comics who would work in nightclubs in the 1940s, let's say, and in early TV, were not very good at acting. Now, anybody can act somehow. What the hell is it? You just say words other people created, and you try not to bump into the camera or fall off the stage. So, as Sir Cedric Hardwicke, the great British actor, once said, acting is the shill game of the arts. You have to really be talented to play the violin. I mean, you're talking about 20 years' work before you could consider yourself a fine violinist. Writing an opera, being a ballet dancer, doing a Fred Astaire. There are a lot of things in the arts that require tremendous talent and dedication and sweat and strain, but not acting. We've all seen 3-year-old children in movies who just, first time up, they're adorable. They're acting just great.
Did you have trouble convincing people that Meeting of Minds would work?
Oh, yes. It took me 18 years to get it on the air. And of course, I guess it was the very fact of all that wasted time that made the satisfaction of its eventual tremendous success all the more enjoyable. I don't mean for ego reasons, but just in the sense of having it turn out that I was right about something and all the critics were wrong. For those who don't know what we're talking about, Meeting of Minds, by the way, I smell toast.
Yes.
And it seems to be burning, but if we had smell-o-vision here, you folks could enjoy the experience.
It's not my tape recorder.
If it is, I'll put a little strawberry jam on it and see how it works. But what the heck was I just talking? Oh, yes, Meeting of Minds.
Or loss of memory.
It was a talk show in appearance, but only in appearance. In reality, our shows were dramas, actual plays, put into the setting of a television talk show. And the unique distinction of the show, of course, was that all of the guests were important figures from history. We had such as philosophers, Francis Bacon, Plato, Aristotle, Thomas Aquinas. We had social activists. We had scientists, great women of history, most of them played by my wife, Jane. And we would bring them together around the table, 3 or 4 at a time, Leonardo da Vinci, Charles Darwin, many great names, and just discuss their life's work. And we brought together people who never could have met in reality because they might have lived 1,000 years or 1,000 miles apart. And it was truly exciting television. The nation's probably most prominent conservative economist, Milton Friedman, has described it publicly as the single best series in the entire history of television.
Steve Allen has contributed a lot to television and the arts over the years. Meeting of the Minds, if you missed it, a tremendous program. And as Steve said, such a different kind of concept that it took him nearly 20 years to get a producer to finally go ahead with it. If you have children, you'll want to stay tuned because Steve Allen has some very strong thoughts about what you should do to try to straighten up Hollywood. We'll get into the issue of censorship and wrap it up as we talk to the great Renaissance man Steve Allen on this week's program. I asked Steve Allen bluntly if there's an answer to this question. How do you reconcile the need to clamp down on all the crud in movies with the fact that neither he nor I wants to see censorship in this country. Is there an answer to that question?
Yes and no. If by an answer you mean some statement comprised of maybe 4 or 5 wise sentences, which, if applied to the problem, would result in the solution. No, there's no such answer. In fact, there's no such answer to probably any of life's serious and complex problems and issues. But happily, there's an unlimited number of little localized specific answers which you can do to help what we're talking about here. And it's a problem that has concerned me particularly the last 8 or 10 years. It concerns the fact that, to use very simple language, show business, the arts generally, have gotten awful damn dirty. And that's unprecedented. I don't mean historically. It was the case in 4th century Europe and so forth. In fact, it was the case in the early centuries that people in show business, which might include actors, acrobats, singers, whatever they were regarded as such depraved people. They were literally regarded the way today we view rapists or narcotics peddlers or prostitutes, that sort of thing, as the lowest of the low. And even the church, the Catholic Church, for long periods, would not permit any entertainers to be buried in consecrated ground. And the fact that a woman like Madonna, who deliberately markets not great voice, she never claimed to be a fine singer. The people who dance behind her on stage dance much better than she does, and she's by no means distinguished herself as an actress. She is very modestly talented, but she's enormously successful, makes $30, $40, $50 million a year, and that's pretty successful, isn't it? So this is a serious problem, and everyone who cares about it has to do something about it. You might say, well, sure, you can get at TV and radio, so you can do that. But everybody can do something. If you see tonight on a commercial network or any television outlet some show that either in whole or in part really disgusts you and that you wouldn't want your children or grandchildren to see, don't just turn it off and get angry. Turn it off and get angry, and use your anger to lead you to compose a civil letter to the head of Paramount Pictures or NBC or whatever is the offending CEO, and communicate your sentiments to him. Now, this is like the vote. One vote never lost or won anything much if there was a large voting public. But a collection of votes is decisive in our form of government, and a collection of letters of this sort, even if you're talking about 38 letters, 103 letters, if you send them to the right people, they do have an effect, I can assure you of that. Time Warner has been a terrible offender, as dozens of editorialists and commentators have pointed out the last couple of years, as a result of which a lot of people have made the Time Warner executives feel personally guilty, and now they are beginning to reform.
Steve, thank you very much.
My pleasure.
What a guy. What an intellect. What a talent. What a gentle man. Steve Allen. I'm Dennis Daly.